Time to get started with this webinar. For those of you that were on a little bit earlier, I'll introduce myself again. My name is Sean Scanlon. I'm an Executive Vice President here at GSI. The topic of today is getting ahead EnterpriseOne Platforms, basically on platform selection and how to determine which is the best platform for your organization. It's not a comprehensive list of reasons, but we do try to go through a lot of the most important criteria for customers when they're selecting platforms. This webinar is part of a series of webinars that we do here at GSI under the Getting Ahead slogan. We go over topics such as upgrading, virtualization, high availability, disaster recovery, technical considerations about 9.0, and various other topics. If you do have any questions, or if for any reason you can't see something on the screen, please feel free to use the chat functionality in the GoToWebinar menu. Either that, or if you have a question, you can use the questions functionality. I'll answer questions in the order in which they were received at the end of the webinar. So let's get going. As I mentioned, my name is Sean Scanlon. My contact information is on screen should you need to reach out to me for anything. If there's something that wasn't clear during the webinar, or if you think of some question after the fact that you'd like some further follow-up with, or you just want to tell me you hated the whole webinar and never want to hear my voice again, that's my contact information. So feel free to write it down and use it as you see fit. So quick disclaimer. As I mentioned, there's a lot of reasons for selecting platforms. We're not trying to say that this is a comprehensive list of everything. Prior to getting into any kind of large investment in infrastructure, we always recommend that customers go through an architectural assessment. Most likely, you'd want to bring in some type of third-party organization. GSI can definitely help you out with that. And there are other really great partners out there as well. Lastly, this presentation is content of a technical nature and will not be suitable for all audiences. So discretion is advised. The agenda for today. We're going to talk a little bit about GSI, not a ton. Go through the EnterpriseOne ecosystem. What is EnterpriseOne? How has CNC changed? That kind of thing. Do some performance comparisons of some various architectures, some support comparisons, try to put some costs along the lines of what it takes to actually support some of these systems, talk about total cost of ownership, go through some conclusions that we can make based on that information, and then kind of some last topics to really think about when you're looking at architectures and making decisions for your own organization. And then a couple of last-minute additions, really just some newer architectures that kind of show that J.D. Edwards has, increased in performance significantly since some of these tests were first put together. And then try to answer any questions that you might have. So, real quickly about GSI, and yes, this is our shameless plug. GSI is a gold partner, Oracle Gold partner. We focus on J.D. Edwards clients and services. So, CNC is a big part of what we do, but it's not the only thing that we do. We do a lot with development, a lot with applications functional, a lot of remote support, DBA support, remote development, remote application support. We've got over 200 years of core J.D. Edwards experience within the organization, and we have customers, from the 50 million range all the way up to the 10 billion range. And some of the largest architectures that are out there are architectures that we either implemented or support. In fact, I think we have the largest Linux Oracle implementation that we support now for one of our customers in the world. That is now one of our customers. We've got over 100 J.D. Edwards technical and functional specialists in our talent pool, and most of those are Oracle certified. And we have over 21 years relationship with Oracle's J.D. Edwards team. A lot of our guys were on the original world teams, came up within the CNC practice, and became EnterpriseOne certified. Some of them also were on the functional side and became certified in EnterpriseOne. We do a lot with upgrades, assessments, implementations. Those are both local and global. In fact, we have an upcoming trip to Hong Kong to help a customer that's implementing multiple instances into one. So it's instance consolidation that we're looking at for that particular one. We've got over 90 upgrades and counting. We've done both world to E1 upgrades and stack migrations. Lots of world upgrades, actually, and lots of stack migrations for that matter. We do managed services, remote DBA services, as I mentioned. Field consulting, obviously a pretty big thing for us within our organization, and remote application and CNC services. We do a lot with performance optimization, load balancing, archiving, disaster recovery, high availability. We have a lot of presentations on those kinds of things. And one thing that I think is kind of separates us a little bit from the pack is we have a 100% guarantee on all of our services. So if for any reason you're not satisfied with the work that we've done, we'll either come and fix it for free or you won't have to pay for it at all. And that's somewhat unique in the industry. As far as verticals, we really deal with all of the verticals, and that's because we have a strong focus on technology. I would say recently our main areas of concern have been around real estate and property management. We're doing a lot in that, a lot on the application side, a lot on the CNC side. Oil and gas is also really big right now. A couple of our customers on the wine and spirit side, that's been really big. And then as far as J.D. Edwards is concerned, it's always big on the manufacturing and distribution side, so we always have customers in those areas as well. As far as platforms, we deal with every single platform. We had the very first Windows SQL 2008, Windows 2008 implementation. It was a little bit prior to when support really officially came out, but we worked with Oracle in order to kind of get a few things understood in advance to the official support coming out. And actually we were, for a while, a reference for Microsoft until I guess there became so many Windows SQL 2008 that it didn't matter anymore. As far as all the, we do deal with all the stacks, red stack, blue stack. We deal with WebSphere. Still a little bit of OAS, although most people are moving off of OAS and moving to WebLogic now. We've been doing a lot with Fusion middleware, BSSV, business services in general, integrations, utilizing the Fusion middleware, all the virtual type machines, and we have a couple other webinars about virtualization and things of that nature. And XML and BI Publisher, we've been doing a lot with that as well. So as far as EnterpriseOne Ecosystems, I wanted to really quick kind of point out, based on information that I gathered from Oracle and information kind of an informal nature off the JDE list, what other customers are doing in terms of platforms. And prior to getting into that, I just kind of wanted to real quick touch on the CNC ecosystem in general. For those of you that have been around within J.D. Edwards or have moved or are looking at from World to moving to J.D. Edwards EnterpriseOne, there's been a lot of changes since the concept of CNC was originally introduced. And originally it was all client, fat client based, communicating with enterprise server. A lot of your business function logic was processing locally. A lot of people would even process some of their UBEs locally. You had a few different operating systems and database flavors, but the databases, in terms of their capability, were a lot less advanced as they are now. They didn't really have a web solution in the beginning. It was really kludgy. You had this you had two options. You had the HTML option and you had this Java application option. And the Java application was this, well, at the time, a 50 meg file, which at that time was humongous. that was the only way that you could deploy this thing, and it looked kind of like a fat client, but was in this menu thing on your browser. It just never really took off. There weren't really any system administration tools. You had real basic security, didn't have the concept of multiple roles per user, and all of your interfaces were really batch interfaces. So if you fast forward now to 2011, you've added in Linux as an additional platform to run on. As far as database, DB2 UDB was added in there, although it didn't ever really take off. So it's kind of falling off. I think it's actually even falling off of support altogether because of the dropping of BlueStack. You've got advanced database capabilities in terms of record reservation, record locking, compression, all kinds of additional database capabilities, clustering, you name it. Now you really only have the web as an interface to JD Edwards. You have WebLogic, OAS, or WebSphere, and OAS is soon to be dropped from support. So then it'll be basically WebLogic through Oracle and WebSphere through IBM if you want support for WebSphere. Now you have the role-based security. So you have the ability to have multiple roles per user. You've got Active Directory integration. You've got Server Manager for managing all of your systems from a single console, which is great. You've got the Fusion middleware that I was kind of mentioning a little bit before. So you have a lot more capabilities in terms of integration points using Beeple and other web services and real-time events for doing integration. You have the concept of clustering that's native in JD Edwards now. So you can cluster batch servers, you can cluster interactive servers, you can cluster database servers. All of that is relatively new, really, in the last couple of years as far as clustering is concerned. And virtualization. You know, a lot of people have been using VMware for quite some time, but OVM is now officially supported or has been officially supported for a little while. So there is actually an officially supported virtualization platform by Oracle, and we can talk about that at in a different webinar. If anybody's interested in being part of that virtualization webinar, we kind of go into the whole concept of what does support mean for the two different platforms. So as far as other customers, you know, what are they doing? But based upon installation numbers I was given by Oracle, and a lot of this is, you know, based on what they know. So they retain a whole database of customers, who downloads what they know of what they know has been installed by the user base. And you know, there are a little bit of surprising numbers here in terms of platform. I really expected initially that IBM System I would be above 25%, and I thought it would be more in the same realm as the Windows SQL Server, which is 40%. But I believe that the reason why the numbers are kind of skewed in favor of Windows SQL is because there are a lot more smaller customers that are running Windows SQL environments, whereas kind of like your larger customers tend to run IBM System I and Unix Oracle databases. Linux Oracle database, at the time that I retrieved these numbers, it was about 5%. But I know there's a couple of really large customers that have moved to all Linux Oracle. And a lot of the largest JD Edwards customers in the world are really looking at Linux Oracle as the operating system and database of choice based on scalability and supportability from Oracle. As I mentioned before, you know, the IBM DB2 UDB, that's really dropping off, and there's a lot less customers that are really on it. So if you kind of look at the last touch point, you know, the larger customers tend to move towards Unix Oracle or IBM System I. So it's really, in terms of revenue or support revenue, it's kind of more flat in terms of the breakdown. And this is a kind of non-scientific poll conducted by Alexander Paschov on the JDE list, which is kind of interesting because it really comes close to supporting those exact same numbers. You know, maybe they're a little bit off and a little bit less on the Unix Oracle side, but really pretty similar if you look at the breakdown. So I thought that that was kind of interesting, and that's the main reason why I even put it up there, was just to show that it's not just Oracle coming up with those numbers based on what they know in their database. It's also based on users voting on some things as well. At the time of this, Oracle Application Server versus WebSphere was about 50-50, but now everything's kind of moving towards WebLogic, so it's probably skewed the numbers a little bit. So it probably looks more like WebSphere, maybe 40%, and then the other 60% divided between WebLogic and OAS, with a little bit more lean towards OAS at this point, because there's still people moving off of OAS and onto WebLogic. So that's pretty much what other people are doing. So in terms of performance comparisons, and the question here is to really ask, you know, is there really a difference between all these different platforms, and what makes up that difference? So I did a lot of research on the various platforms. Not everything that I found, they're really, on some of them, it's obvious that the data is a little bit outdated. But it's the best that's out there, and it's the best that you can find at this point in time. And I wanted to try to collate all that into one source. And if we kind of go through it, you know, you look at the Windows SQL, Sun Oracle, the DB2. This is an all-on-I, you know, standard I-series type configuration where everything's running on a single box, and then a Linux Oracle implementation running on Oracle VM. As long as everything is 8.12 and above, the performance comparisons should be similar. Now, because the Windows SQL and the Sun Oracle releases were running a tools release prior to 8.9.7, you actually can probably estimate that the performance would be a little bit better running an 8.9.7 or an 8.9.8 tools release. So as we look at the numbers that kind of come out of this, we'll just have to take that into consideration. But even with that not considered, the performance on those platforms is still pretty good. So let's just go look through this real quick. So in all of them, the tests were conducted using HP LoadRunner. So, you know, you could say, hey, my systems are better at batch, or my systems are better at handling, you know, this particular type of activity. But they were all based upon running the same types of transactions. It was all online transactions. There was no batch. So it's not that, you know, one set of tests had an advantage over another set of tests, because everybody was running basically the same thing. Every test was conducted running HP LoadRunner. Everything was tested using the same type of scripts. The original testing scripts for the first two platforms, the Windows and Sun tests, were originally run using Oracle's original, they just had scripts. They didn't call them the day in the life scripts. That's what they call them now, is the day in the life scripts. But they're very similar. The differences being in some of the newer ones, they added in a little bit more HR payroll and some other functionality that wasn't originally available in the scripting on a couple of the tests originally. But every single test was on 8.12 and above, and all the tests were conducted between 2007, like late 2007 timeframe, and 2010. Most of the tests were conducted by IBM, with the exception of the Sun Oracle test. And it's interesting to note that when you look at every single one of those tests that's conducted by IBM, it essentially is trying to convince you that that platform is the best platform to run JD Edwards on. And I find that kind of interesting, seeing as how they're all coming from the same exact vendor. But anyway, as far as the Windows SQL test, if you look at the hardware that was utilized for this, and the costs for this, I got updated pricing as of about 3 or 4 months ago. So this is a little outdated, and probably you could get these systems all of these systems for less now. But if you look at kind of the hardware that was in use at the time, this is kind of what we're looking at. A single database server running 64-bit edition of Windows 2003 with SQL 2005. And as far as the databases, SQL 2005 and SQL 2008, they're similar in performance. So it's not going to be a night and day difference between 2005 and 2008. If this test would have been conducted on SQL 2000, I wouldn't have even bothered including it. But SQL 2005 has similar performance comparison. And then, in this particular database, we're looking at 8 gig of RAM. Now, I would not really recommend this type of configuration for most customers, meaning I don't think that there's enough memory or disk or anything of that nature. But when we're talking about comparing apples to apples and the exact same scripts and the performance and the response and everything else, just keep in mind that everybody was running the same test, so it's a fair comparison all the way around. Application server, again, this was for both web and applications, so it's a single box running both interactive and web functions, and 16 gigs of RAM, so really it was divided up into a couple of JVMs to service the user load, and there's the pricing on that. So based on the outcome of the test, we had a couple of different user loads on the different systems, and there's the user load and the CPU and memory utilization based upon the user load and based upon the individual systems. Could you really get 1,000 users on this box? No, but you can if you're doing a certain type of testing. And the main thing is to consider here is that, okay, I'm running 500 user tests, I'm using 1,000 user load. I can provide you guys with the scripts that were actually run if you're interested in that information, but I removed it from the presentation because it just takes up a lot of slides. And the main thing to consider is that in all of them, they're all running the same scripts. So CPU utilization got up to 75% on 1,000 user load with 9.7 gigs of memory on this application and web server. If you added in batch and really had people getting in the system, not following a script and clicking on random things, I'm sure it would never really be able to handle that kind of load. But it is interesting to see the output, and the average response time in all of these was pretty reasonable, and the total price on the thing was around $52,000. So Sun Oracle test, this was running WebSphere 6. You can see the systems up there, how it was tested. I put the prices for both Oracle Standard and Oracle Enterprise. The reason why there's two different pricings is because Oracle Standard comes with Red Stack licensing, so you get the database as part of your licensing. So if you decided that I wanted to do this implementation with the Oracle Standard database, which doesn't have any kind of processor cost and is basically an unlimited use license for J.D. Edwards, you can remove the database cost from the equation of the hardware because it's included in your licensing. However, if you went with Oracle Enterprise, then you'd have to license it for processor, and you can see that there's a significant cost difference for Oracle Enterprise over Oracle Standard. And again, here's the system for the web and EnterpriseOne services, and it's kind of similar in terms of processor and memory. A little bit more cost because it's running Sunfires. So if you look at the overall user load and CPU and memory response, it's actually not too much different than what we saw with the Windows SQL system. So even at 1,000 user load, you've got 75% utilization and 9.7 gigs of memory loaded up on the enterprise server, which is almost exactly the same number as you saw with Windows SQL, which is pretty interesting, especially given that one was conducted by Sun and one test was conducted by IBM, but they still have very similar outcomes in terms of performance. And weighted response time on either one still is pretty good. So as you can see, again, the costs will be different depending upon whether you're going with Oracle Standard or Oracle Enterprise. The IBM All-on-I configuration, IBM actually had two separate configurations, one for a 500 user load and one for a 1,000 user load. The pricing that I got was given to me by Sirius for these machines. This was before they came out with the special pricing for J.D. Edwards customers. So you can assume probably a 25% discount on this. And also, you know, the pricing may have changed somewhat since we originally got these pricing numbers. So, you know, it might be a little bit lower even than that. But still significantly different on the 500 user load. If we go to 1,000 user configuration, you can see that price jumps up quite a bit. In terms of CPU utilization for the 500 and 1,000 user systems, you've got similar, you've actually got higher CPU utilization for those two systems. The memory utilization was not known. They didn't actually have metrics for that, but the non-database faults were under 70 per second, so it wasn't really bad in terms of non-database faults. The weighted average response time is kind of opposite of what we saw on all the other ones, where there's a longer response time for the 500 user configuration than for the 1,000 user configuration, and a lot of that has to do with how the system caches up users when they initially log in. So people that were, you know, when the system was first logging in the users, it took more time to service those than it did as they started coming in and it started caching some of the information. So it just, the weighted response time actually went down over an increased user load. Last configuration is the Linux Oracle configuration with OAS. I apologize that there's nothing really out there on WebLogic. I mean, as soon as that information becomes available, and I'll let you know if that does become available. In fact, I even looked for it today before I presented these numbers because I wanted to see if there was anything, you know, really new in terms of metrics. But unfortunately, there just isn't. This is an Oracle all-on-one configuration, so this is going to be utilizing Oracle virtual machines and a similar configuration to what we saw with the all-on-I configuration, but instead of running everything like in a single LPAR, which is what you would be looking at in an AS400, or perhaps running on multiple LPARs with WebSphere running on a separate LPAR, this one is breaking out the system utilizing individual Oracle virtual machines. And one thing to note in terms of overall performance, OVM will typically be quicker for performance than VMware and doesn't have the same processor and memory restrictions that VMware has. And that's not, I'm not suggesting that VMware is better or OVM is better. It's just something to consider when you're talking about virtualization, and we talk about that in a different presentation. But anyway, you can see the overall infrastructure and hardware, how the VMs were allocated. So, you know, we had a database with 2 cores, 25 gigs of RAM. The OAS virtual machines had 3 cores and 10 gigs of RAM. E1 logic server was allocated 2 cores and 25 gigs of RAM, and it was running Oracle 11G for the database, and a relatively recent version of OVM and OAS. Again, pricing changes significantly if you're using Oracle Standard versus Oracle Enterprise because of the things I talked about before, which is basically licensing per processor on the database. So if you look at the overall CPU utilization and memory utilization, you know, it's all definitely still within safe numbers, same scripts, same number of users, same exact everything. So it's a fair test amongst all of them. In this case, you know, slightly worse performance at 1,000 users, but not really significant in terms of response time. So it's, pretty safe to say that every single instance and every single architecture stood up pretty well on both a 500 and 1,000 user load, utilizing the scripts that JD Edwards/Oracle puts out for testing purposes. Now, I wanted to kind of put out the response time versus the pricing so that you could see, all right, here's what types of response time that I'm looking at on each one of my configurations, and here's what it costs for the different configurations. So you can kind of, I'm not suggesting that this is, every single thing that you need to consider when you're looking at pricing out your system and determining which is the best architecture, but it obviously gives you some ammunition for suggesting, hey, look, I've seen these tests, I've seen these architectures, some of them cost less than other ones, but they still have the same or similar response times utilizing the same exact test. So does that tell you something in terms of, which is the best platform? It may or may not, and there's some other things to consider, and we're going to get into those next. And that's really getting into support comparisons and how do these different platforms play out against one another in terms of support. Salary results that I've got for the different types of positions were obtained from payscale.com. In every single instance, I tried to utilize a certified style resource, if there is a certified resource description available. And that was just to keep the playing field level. So, certified Linux, certified Microsoft, certified AS400, certified Oracle DBA, certified SQL DBA, that type of thing. So when we look at Windows and SQL with OAS 10G, first things to consider right out the bat, as far as support from the vendor, the support options from Microsoft, they're not really that great. You kind of have this pay per incident type of approach. If I want to open up a call with Microsoft or have a customer open up a call with Microsoft, it's usually going to be on kind of a pay per incident type situation, unless, of course, you're a large-scale customer and you have a lot of Microsoft stuff going on. They do have more support offerings available for enterprise-style customers, but it's not like you just buy the software and you automatically get the support like you do with some of the other platforms. However, the online support and forums for Windows platforms, there's just a ton of it. So if you're looking for, SQL performance optimization settings, how to do index tuning, how to do a lot of complex type things with SQL database, it's usually out there, and you can almost always find information on it just by Googling it. And that even goes as far as, issues. So if I have a specific error, a lot of times I can find that information right online. So that's a benefit. As far as supporting the platforms, in many cases, customers have a single person that supports all of it. So I might have a person that knows Windows, SQL, and kind of picks up OAS, or nowadays it would be WebLogic as a replacement for OAS. As far as finding salary requirements for the different types of positions, as far as a Windows admin, his skill level needs to be medium for this. They don't really have to have a whole lot of dedication. For the most part, you're going to be in there bouncing services, doing some packages, that type of thing. But it's not, you're not going to have, that's not going to be their full-time job doing that stuff for the most part. So their dedication is not going to need to be that high to JD Edwards as a whole. And on average, the salaries for those types of positions are about $60,000 a year. SQL DBA, a little bit more pricey. If you're talking about certified DBA, it's going to be more in the realm of $75,000 a year. Do you need a SQL DBA? I would say that's kind of dependent upon the size of your implementation. If you've got a lot of users and large databases and you're doing clustering and things like that, for sure, you need a certified SQL DBA. If you're a, 50 users or less, single box with the server and the database and batch and everything running on it, then probably not, As far as an OAS admin or a WebLogic admin, salaries are really not available out there for those positions because there aren't people that specifically work in those positions themselves. So it's kind of one of those add-on skill sets that you'll typically have in addition to, Windows or some other thing. As far as the Sun Oracle running WebSphere, Sun support right now, because J.D. Edwards, or I should say because Oracle bought Sun, it should be getting better. It should become more integrated. It's still one of those things right now where I think it's kind of, still, I don't know if anybody remembers when OAS was first being offered for J.D. Edwards. It was one of those things where, okay, well, if you have a issue with J.D. Edwards, you're going through regular J.D. Edwards support, but if it's an OAS issue, well, you might have to get moved over to Oracle support, which is totally different. It's still a little bit like that, and I'm sure it will be for a while until that becomes a little bit more integrated. But I would expect that over time, Sun support will become more of an industry leader, along with J.D. Edwards, that is. The WebSphere support through IBM, it's great, but it's diminishing through J.D. Edwards, and it's going to diminish completely away from J.D. Edwards at some point when support stops from J.D. Edwards for WebSphere. I know that now is the time when they're no longer selling BlueStack licensing, so you really don't have like a BlueStack and a RedStack. You just have Foundation licensing. So they're not selling WebSphere anymore. They're still supporting WebSphere through J.D. Edwards or through Oracle up through, I believe, 2013. And then it's not that, it won't work anymore. It's just that you'd have to get support through IBM. Some people may actually see that as a plus because IBM support for their products is excellent. And we'll get into that kind of in another slide too. But some of my customers now that run WebSphere, even though they've bought in the license through J.D. Edwards as part of the Foundation licensing, if they have IBM support for some other platform like iSeries, oftentimes they'll get IBM to support them on the WebSphere side, even though they have nothing to do with that. And they just do a really great job. They're always really good about support and getting you in contact with somebody. But anyway, in terms of skill set and salary, again, you'll see that you'll always need a Windows admin because the deployment server, at least right now, has to run on Windows. That's changing and is supposed to be able to be running on Linux, I believe, in the next major tools release. But currently, it still runs only on Windows, so you'll need a Windows person, at least for that. As far as a Unix administrator, I kind of put their skill level and dedication up a little higher because Unix administrators tend to be a lot more involved and like to split things out and partition things out, allocate disk a lot different than a Windows admin typically would do. And then as far as a database administrator, I mean, it's the same type of thing. They're going to be more involved. They're going to be a little bit higher of a skill level than you would typically need unless you had a really complex configuration with a Windows SQL. At least that's been my experience. So in terms of salary requirements for this type of configuration, you can see it. They're there on the right. As far as the all-on-I, I mean, there's really nothing more to say about IBM support other than, at least in my experience and my colleagues' experience, it's the best support that there is. So you're really not going to get better. They're always great about answering phone calls and everything else, and getting you directly to an engineer when you have an issue. So salary requirements, skill level, that kind of thing, you can see. I was a little bit surprised that I-Series administrators were, at that salary range, but that's the average industry average, I should say, for that position. As far as Linux and Oracle, Linux is a pretty new operating system, so there's not really a lot of certified Linux administrators out there. But as far as universities and colleges, everybody's coming out knowing Linux. So you're going to get that experience in short order. And one thing that you may see as you're looking at some of the other platforms is that if they're not kind of the brand new, hot operating system, or haven't been for a number of years, the skill sets in those areas are diminishing substantially. And we've had a lot of customers that have looked at replatforming specifically because of that they're in kind of remote locations where they're having difficulty finding replacements for people that want to retire. That's one of the main reasons to look at replatforming if that's something that you're thinking about. So total cost of ownership on all the systems. If you wrap up the actual hardware and the personnel costs and you total it up for the different configurations, you can kind of see, what the system is going to cost you. And that's, obviously I only took personnel costs on a single year basis. I didn't say this is what it's going to cost you over 5 years. This is over a period of a year, assuming that, you're purchasing that hardware in a year. If you wanted to spread that cost out, if you're leasing or whatever else, and you wanted to see the cost of, employees along with it, and then it would be a different number, obviously, but this kind of tells you a little bit about what you're facing in terms of system and personnel. Now, that's not everything that's wrapped into total cost of ownership, so we'll get into that a little bit next. One thing that I didn't want to really put into the cost, because it's going to be different for every single customer, is the cost of downtime. I can't say what it's going to cost, customer A versus customer B, because only that customer can say what the cost of downtime is for them. But as you can see, if you have a high cost of downtime, and some of our customers, it's $1 million an hour or more, unplanned downtime in a couple of these circumstances would really make the IBM I look a lot more attractive when you're talking about cost of that downtime. And all of these sources for downtime are put in the study here too. So, you could be looking at a difference of $25 million on an annual basis, really, if you had $1 million downtime between SQL Server and IBM I configuration. So that's something to really take into consideration. So some quick conclusions. If you're just looking at hardware and personnel, Windows SQL is going to be the winner. The performance on all of them is similar enough that you might as well just say that they're the same. But the costs for the different architectures are way different. So it's something that you really need to think about. Now, one thing that we didn't really talk about is, customers that already have Windows admins aren't going to need to add in another Windows admin. And who these days doesn't have a Windows admin? I mean, you almost always have something running on Windows at every customer. So could you potentially leverage that resource in the position? There's a pretty good chance of it. The Oracle standard is free with RedStack. So that's something to think about, because pricing will change significantly if you're going to have to use Oracle Enterprise. Also, if you're looking at high availability and disaster recovery options, if if I'm thinking about scalability and I want to build in, I want to factor in the cost of the downtime. Like, let's say we go back to that Windows slide and it was 30 hours annually for downtime. Well, I can mitigate that pretty easily by just duplicating my systems and building in clustering. Now, if one system goes down, I have the other system. So I can make that number closer to 0. The cost of duplicating my hardware is still going to be lower than the costs on some of the other systems. So it's something to really think about. And when you're designing architectures, that's something that you have to consider is high availability and not so much disaster recovery in this particular instance, but high availability is really an important thing if I'm looking at reducing my overall costs. Also, when I'm talking about third-party interfacing, there's a lot of just because I'm moving from one system to another system doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be as simple as that. I may have third-party bolt-on applications that only function on certain platforms, so I really have to think about that. One thing to keep in mind is that as far as Oracle database and SQL database, most third-party applications are written to integrate with either of those in the first place. So if I'm talking about bolting on other things, if I want to bring in Agile, if I want to bring in Demantra, those are probably going to run on Oracle or SQL. And I'm not just talking about those specifically. Both of those run on Oracle, but there's other ones that that would run on SQL as well. So it's something to think about. And most companies already have an Oracle or a SQL database in-house for something else. So could I leverage a person that's already doing the database for another application? In those cases, a lot of times the answer is yes. As I mentioned, most companies have a Windows system admin. And we also talked about downtime. If downtime is considered, costs change significantly. One thing that you may notice out of this is that there's some negatives about the IBM System I. There's also some positives about the IBM System I. I personally have all my background in the IBM System I, and that's where I spent the majority of my J.D. Edwards days. But unfortunately for IBM, they're not kind of the hot operating system anymore, and so as time goes by, it's going to be one of those positions that's going to be a little bit more difficult to fill if you decide, hey, I'm going to stick on AS400. I might be running World, and I might be on an AS400, but what am I going to do 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Eventually, that's going to be a difficult platform to be sitting on. Also, we kind of talked about scalability. Windows and Linux are going to be easily scalable. The cost of the hardware is cheap, and it's always getting cheaper. What costs me $10,000 this year, next year is going to cost me $5,000 for the same thing. And it's always like that. So if I want to pick an architecture that's going to grow with me, that's definitely something to consider. Another thing is if I go with a Windows or a Linux option and I go through and my company shrinks in size, or I don't have as many users in J.D. Edwards as I initially anticipated, those architectures are going to be much more easily utilized for other applications. So I'm not going to be, trying to decide what am I going to do with all this extra capacity. Well, maybe I'll just take this box that was going to be a, web server, and I'll go do something else with it. I can use it for something else. Same thing with the high availability and disaster recovery options. Because the hardware in general is a lot cheaper and the operating systems are cheaper, if I want to duplicate those, it's not going to cost me as much. If I wanted to duplicate an iSeries implementation and have 2 actual iSeries boxes, I'm talking about a significant investment. And it's not the same to just say I'm going to, mimix off to another LPAR and back it up to tape and ship it off to SunGuard or some other offsite, disaster recovery zone. That's not providing me any kind of high availability. And really, in terms of disaster, you know, you have to go out there, you have to get the thing back up and running, you have to do all this stuff. If I have just another box in another area and it's tied to my network and I have redundant systems, it's going to be a lot quicker bringing that thing up again. If you were looking at outsourcing or co-sourcing, you could definitely shrink downtime. If downtime costs are your biggest factor, those can definitely mitigate your downtime costs. You have SLAs provided by your hosting providers, that type of thing. You know, they're in charge of the hardware. They have to bring it up in a certain amount of time with a certain amount of data loss, all that data recovery points, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, if that's important to you, then that's something that you should consider as well. You know, maybe it's not worth the cost of getting, you know, this industry-leading data center when I could just leverage a data center that, you know, some hosting provider already has. And then, you know, what are the skill sets of your internal personnel? What do you already support? Does it make sense to go with an Oracle database if everybody in the company is running, you know, stuff on SQL database? Maybe not, you know. Maybe you're looking for future direction that Oracle is going to take and you're concerned about support. I don't think you really need to worry about whether or not Oracle is going to support SQL database when 40% of the J.D. Edwards install base is running SQL Server, right? So don't take that really into heart in terms of, you know, what's Oracle going to do in terms of support. They can't just take the database out from underneath everybody. However, they can give you a lot more freebies with Oracle, and that's something to think about too. Also, in terms of future plans, you know, what are you going to be doing? Are you going to be adding users? Is the idea that, you know, I have one set of functionality right now, and I plan on implementing a lot more later? You know, if so, the Windows, SQL, and the Linux Oracle options are going to allow you to start with one set of hardware and scale up to another set of hardware in the future when I actually have those users coming on board. That's going to give you the benefit of, you know, not putting in forth a significant investment right up front, kind of based on some future direction, but really based on what I actually need right now today. Now in the future, you know, maybe you do implement all these things that you thought about implementing, maybe you don't. Well, if you don't have to worry about it because you didn't buy the hardware in the first place. If you do, you're probably going to be able to buy that hardware for half the cost. So it's one of those things to think about in terms of, you know, planning for the future. Other things, just sizing in general. You know, how many reports are you running? How many are run concurrent? UBEs and batch jobs can really change things a lot when you're talking about architecting things. So it's something to really take in mind. And those are also things that can be clustered and can be scaled out. As far as future plans for users, we kind of got into that a little bit. Service level agreements with the business, that's always something to think about, because depending upon the architecture that you choose and the way that you architect it in the first place, you know, you may not be able to live up to your SLAs. Maintenance windows, you know, if I have a single system and a single architecture and it's all on one sort of setup, I'm going to have a lot more difficulty doing maintenance on that system. You know, if I need to pull out a piece of hardware, for instance, and everything's on that box, well, that's going to make it pretty difficult without taking everybody off the system. If I design the system in such a way that, you know, I can pull out half the systems and still run all my user load on the other half, that's something that, you know, could really limit my downtime window. And we've done a lot of architectures like that where a customer said, hey, I really am 24/7, like true 24/7. I don't want to be down for packages. I don't want to be down for tools releases. I don't want to be down ever. And you can design architectures that will not be down ever. It just takes, you know, money. The threat of viruses, that's another one too. You know, the hardware options and the software options that you choose all have various levels of threat for viruses. Right now, there's really no major viruses that have ever been identified on iSeries. If you take out for some reason I'm drawing a blank, but the Windows side of things, if you take out that as far as consideration, you just look at iOS running DB2 400, you're not going to get viruses on that system. The other ones, it's a little bit more so, especially if you look at Windows. I mean, Windows is getting viruses written for it almost every day. Linux, still not so many viruses that run on Linux. There's very few, and that's, I think, primarily just due to the fact that not everybody runs Linux at home, but mostly everybody runs Windows at home. And when people write viruses targeted to steal things, they tend to go for, what's going to hit the most people all at once. So that's something to consider as well when you're looking at architectures. And just a couple last-minute additions. I just wanted to show you that there are tests that are ongoing on some of these new systems. So not everything is older. We've got a couple of Spark systems. This is right after Oracle. Well, I should say it's a few months after Oracle bought Sun. They came out with J.D. Edwards running on the Sun T3 hardware configuration, and they were running Enterprise 9.0 Update 1, with Schools Release 898.3, Oracle 11G. This one was still the Oracle OC4J application server, so the OAS 10G. Solaris also running the load runner day in the life kits, or day in the life scripts for J.D. Edwards. They were able to get 4,200 users on the system with under 2-second response time. So as those numbers actually kind of correlate back to the tests that I have, and when we can start getting some comparison numbers, I'll get that information out. And if anybody wants that information, please send me a message or whatever, and I'll follow up with you. Anyway, so if you have any questions, now's the time to ask. I see that there is one. For the companies that are replatforming, what platforms are they moving from? Typically, when I see customers that are replatforming, they're moving off iSeries and onto Linux Oracle. That's probably the biggest platform change. Now, I do see some that move off AS400 and onto SQL Server, and a lot of that is based upon the skill set of the customer. And in fact, I've specifically recommended to a couple of customers that were moving off iSeries that they go with SQL database, and it has nothing to do with the fact that I think SQL is a better database or anything like that, but it's really mainly due to the customer's internal skill set. If you don't have an Oracle DBA, but you have a SQL DBA, and you're looking at replatforming, I would probably go with a SQL database, because that's where your internal skill set is, unless you're looking at hiring somebody in. And that's not to say that you can't learn Oracle database and whatever else, but in this case, they were moving from World to EnterpriseOne, so you're already taking on learning a brand new ERP. Why do you want to throw in learning a database and learning CNC and learning everything else on top of it? Because that's just a lot to take on. So I see a lot of that. We had another customer, or a few different customers, that were looking at either instance consolidation or getting to a single release level, and they wanted a single platform, single release level. Maybe they were going to have multiple instances of J.D. Edwards, but they wanted them at least to be on the same operating system and database and the same release level. And most of the customers that we have are consolidating on either Linux, well, really Linux Oracle. That's been pretty much the direction that everybody's been taking when they've been moving to a single platform. Other than a couple of certain circumstances where they've been moving to SQL database. So hopefully that kind of answered your question. I haven't really seen too many people migrate from SQL Server to Oracle, but there's been a few. And I've not seen anybody migrate off Oracle to SQL database, or at least we have not been involved with any projects that have been Oracle to SQL database. So really, as people are migrating, they're moving from some platform to Oracle. Are there any other questions from anybody else? Okay, well, if you guys don't have any other questions, you know, like I said before, you can definitely feel free to follow up with me. If you want a copy of this presentation, you know, just let me know. I can send it to you. Like I mentioned before, I was recording the presentation, so if you want to listen to it again, you just can't get enough of my droning voice, it'll be available to you at some point in time up on our website, and I'll try to let you know when that happens. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you on another webinar. I believe the next one that we're doing is on upgrades, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Also, next week we're going to be co-presenting with Deloitte on technical considerations around upgrading and how to plan for your upgrade and how to go about your upgrade. So we'll be doing that, and that's on Wednesday of next week. If you didn't get an invitation and you would like to attend that webinar, please let me know, and I'll shoot that out to you. Otherwise, you know, we really look forward to seeing you there or on a future webinar. So thanks again for your time. We really appreciate it. Also, if you have any critiques or comments or suggestions on how we can make this topic better and how you would what you would feel will get you more value out of it, feel free to let me know, because I take all the suggestions to heart, and we really look at trying to make this thing better for the next round. So thanks again for your time, and we look forward to